So I was 5 and my dad committed suicide. Shortly after that, my mom and I relocated to Florida. She was in just a very bad relationship. We lived in Florida for almost 10 years. And during the summer months, I would come back and visit my grandma and stay for a week or two. So one year, my mom came up over her birthday, and she ended up meeting my stepdad. And so shortly after they met, we ended up moving back to Ohio. I'm from Columbiana originally, so 8th grade I went back to Columbiana. And then for high school I went to Crestview. I was a 4-year letterman in golf, not a scholar student by any means, but didn't barely make it across the line. Was always a good kid, never had really any major issues or anything like that. My mom and I have always been very close, so I tried to show her respect and things like that. And so I would have been 15, just going into a sophomore year. Friend asked if I wanted to smoke marijuana, and I thought, yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot. And so I did that at age of 15. And then shortly after that, maybe a year or so later, somebody offered me a pain pill. And I took a pain pill, and it was almost like I got instantly hooked on it. So that would have been around the age of 16. And then so for the next however many years, I got involved with some older people. And so this culture of just living that kind of lifestyle became the normal for me. Started experimenting with different drugs, and one thing would lead to another, and I was just consumed with that sort of lifestyle. And all the while I was still working, and I was holding down jobs, and from a worldly standpoint I was very successful. Any of the jobs that I ever had I always excelled at. And I had enrolled in college right after high school, and so I don't have the typical I wasn't rebelling against my parents or anything like that in order to start experimenting with drugs. It was just something that I started doing. And so then in my early to mid 20s was when things got really bad. I moved to Florida again. After we had moved back, my mom and I always said I wanted to move back to Florida. I knew that there was going to be some point that I moved back. I loved it down there at the time. And I thought, one day I'll see myself. And so one day I packed my car with everything I could fit in it, and I moved in with a friend who she said, come down, you can stay with me until you find a job. And it was somebody that I had known since high school. And then through that avenue, that's when my addiction really became full blown. It was shortly after I was introduced to a person who was a rather large drug dealer in this area. And that was when things began to really spiral out of control. This would have been around 2008, around those years. I remember one year I came back home to visit family over Christmas, and I had weighed 180 pounds, and my face was sunken, and nobody recognized me because I looked so different. My mom didn't recognize me, my grandma, my friends, and everything, and they just, and I had said, well, I'm more active now. I have a busier lifestyle. I had worked for a bar, so I was always running around, and I was playing golf all the time. And so I told everybody that I had a more active lifestyle. And I mean, looking back, I wasn't fooling anybody. They knew it was such a radical transformation. I'm naturally a bigger guy, and so to lose basically 100 pounds, it was very obvious. And so while I'm in Florida, I was just a full-blown drug addict. This was during the years when Florida had, so in the state of Florida, they did not have a prescription monitoring system for a while, so you could doctor shop was what it was called. You could go to different doctors and they would write you scripts. You could go to Walgreens and CVS and Rite Aid, and they didn't communicate with one another. So they had no idea how many prescriptions you were getting. Oh, okay, so there you go. Yeah. So I lived directly across the state from Miami, and we could drive over to Miami and go to these pain pill clinics. And if you had cash, the doctor didn't care. He would just evaluate you. He'd write you a script for whatever you want. So the guy that I was friends with, he would accumulate all of these prescriptions from people, and they would just run back and forth across the state, get a prescription and get it filled, and then sell them to him. So during those years in Florida, you couldn't take 2 steps without tripping over pain pills. They were just everywhere. And so I developed a pretty strong habit during those years. The pain pills were always my vice. I did everything else, but pain pills were always the thing that kept kind of like, bringing me back in. And so Roxycontin was the term. Those were the big things down there. And I had, I was doing anywhere from 8 to 10 pills a day, just to kind of like, the problem when you get hooked on pain pills is you're not even like getting high anymore. Like you're just trying to like make yourself feel normal. And so it just kind of like snowballs from there. You get so consumed and you start losing weight, you're not eating. I of course wasn't working. So I'm living in South Florida, and I have no family down there. And so things are just continuing to get worse. And I remember like I would have a 2 or 3 week time where I was like, okay, this is it. I'm gonna finally get clean. And it would never stick. A friend would call me and say, hey, I've got some, do you want to stop by? And I would be over there instantly. So finally, the first wake-up call, I guess, was I had owed my drug dealer a lot of money, lots and lots of money, because he was the type of guy that would give you like an account. You could just charge it to him and pay him whenever. So I had racked up this really large bill with him, and I started to avoid him and things like that. Then I found a friend who was also selling pills, and I started working with him. He called me on this would have been a Friday, asked if I could stop by and take a look at his computer, and he had some stuff for me, so I did. And as I walked in the door, he locked the door behind me, and out came the guy that I owed all this money to. And so he came over and grabbed me by the throat and threw me into a wall, and threatened to kill me, and that was like sort of like the first wake-up call that I had, was like, oh, my life is, and it was so bad that after all this happened, he called me like an hour later and he was like, you need to get help. So my drug dealer recognized that I was this out of control. I ended up going to, I had family in northern Florida. I went to their house for a couple of weeks to get away from this situation, and to kind of, clear the air and stuff like that. So I went up there for a couple of weeks, and I ended up going back down home. And then, it wasn't but a month or two where I started this, same lifestyle again. And so I thought, okay, it's time, I need to go back to Ohio. And I need to get out of this environment. Nothing's going good here. I need to go back home. And so I went back home, moved in with my parents for like the 9th time or something like that. And then shortly after that started, I got the job I started working at. I overheard a conversation, somebody mentioned, pills, and I kind of butted into the conversation and befriended all these people, and it wasn't long before I was just starting the cycle all over again. And so late 2010, my parents finally caught on, and I told them what I was doing and everything like that. And so my dad, the next day, he drove me to Teen Challenge here in Youngstown. And I lasted a day and a half. I packed my stuff, and I just said, this isn't for me. This was my first introduction to any bit of Christianity. And I wasn't ready to be done with drugs. I felt like I was ripped out of a situation and forced to go to Teen Challenge, and so I left. I went in on like a Tuesday, and I think I left Wednesday afternoon, packed my bags, and I walked directly to a guy's house that I was buying drugs from prior to this. So now my family didn't know I left, friends didn't know I left, and so I just kind of like disappeared off the grid for a couple of days. Ended up being in the hospital, and had some health issues due to the addictions and things like that. And a friend actually from Akron found out that that's where I was, and he came walking into my hospital room, and I was like, how did you find me? What are you doing here? So then my parents came and everything like that. So then on I believe it was a Sunday, I went back to Teen Challenge. Lasted a week. Left due to some, just not being ready, basically. I kind of, worked my way out of, I'll do better this time, I promise. And so my parents kind of like grounded me at the age of, this would have been 2010, so I was in my late 20s, early 30s. They grounded me. I was never allowed by myself. I either had to be with my parents or my grandma. They basically like dropped me off at her house when they would go to work, and then my mom would come and pick me up, and I did this for a while. And so I got 4 months clean because I had no choice. I was sheltered all the time. And so I had a good amount of time built up, and then I started hanging out with some old friends, and then it was, again, just shortly after that, I started right back into the same cycle. And so then for the next probably 2.5 years, it was just you know, full-blown running pretty hard after drugs and living that life again. And so as we go to 2013, things started just, you know, spiraling. And the problem, like with addiction, is you have to wake up every day and remember the lies that you told before. And so those things started to like kind of add up. And people started catching on to what I was doing, and stories didn't add up, and stuff came up missing because I was, you know, stealing from my family and friends, and I was lying and cheating my way to get money. And so finally those things started to come to the light, and I admitted to my mom that, you know, yeah, I had started using again. And at this time I like thought, okay, I'm ready. Like, I am done with this life. I'm tired of waking up every morning and being afraid of the daylight, because now the daylight exposes everything. And I remember being so tired of that. And so they got in touch with a friend who recommended a teen challenge down in West Virginia. Way out in the mountains, beautiful location. From all rehab standards, it was a really nice, it was a nice facility. And so we thought, this is it. You know, I'll be 7 hours away from home. I won't have that temptation to leave. I won't have the temptation to call somebody. And so it took about August 26th was the last day that I used drugs. And it took about a month for me to get into this facility. And so we left to go on a Monday, checked in that afternoon, and then Friday I finagled my way out of it. So I lasted 5 days. So I'm in a small town in West Virginia. They take me to the hospital, and at the hospital, I remember on Sunday, they were ready to discharge me, and I was on the phone with my parents, and they were actually on their way to come and get me. They were in Alliance when they called back and said, we're not coming to get you. They had found out from like the director of this facility and one of the doctors my story that I had been telling. I was lying to my family, I was lying to the doctors, I was lying to the director of the facility. And so my family said, you're on your own, figure it out. Hung up the phone. So now I'm 7 hours away from home, no money, no phone. I am in an area where I know nobody, and now I'm literally homeless. And so the hospital, there was a nurse there who heard what was happening, and she contacted a local ministry, and the local ministry put me in a hotel for the night to try to figure out maybe they can get me a bus pass to come back to Youngstown. So the hotel, and it's funny because I'm very appreciative for it, but the hotel was something that you would see in like a movie. Like the stuff was overgrown, and the door was barely on the hinge, and it was dark, and like it was not a you know, a 5-star resort. And so it was this Sunday evening, and I remember sitting in the hotel room and just kind of evaluating, you know, life and thinking back on all the things that I've done. And here I am, I'm almost 30 years old, and I'm sitting in a hotel room by myself, a drug addict, and just no hope, nothing. And I remember like starting to feel like I needed to come back to Youngstown. And I thought, like, well, that's crazy. I have nothing in Youngstown. I have no friends, family, job, anything. And I just knew that I was supposed to come back to Youngstown. And so through this next, I don't know, maybe 12 hours or so, it comes to Monday, and I get a call from the organization that put me in the hotel, and they say, we don't know if we can get you a bus pass. And I said, okay. And they said, we're going to try to work on it. We'll let you know what we can do. So it's like 11:58, and I had to check out of this hotel at noon. And the guy did not want to extend my time or anything. So they end up calling like a minute later, and they say that, okay, we're going to give you a hotel for another night. We're going to try to get you a bus pass tomorrow and get you out of town and get you back to Youngstown. So I spend the next day just kind of wandering around this small little town, and I met some people down there, told them my story, and then people just started like rallying around me. Like, I went into a pawn shop because I still smoked cigarettes at this time, and I had literally just the clothes that I was wearing, and I had a zip-up sweatshirt. And I wanted a cigarette so bad. And I remember going to this pawn shop, and I said to this guy, I was like, this sweatshirt is all that I own. Told him my story. I said, can you give me $5 for it? And the guy did. And so as I'm walking down the street, another guy comes running out of the building, hands me my sweatshirt back and gives me money and says, here, go get yourself some food. So that was like the first time where I was like, okay, this, you know, random stranger just showed me kindness. So as this day goes on, I go down to a Dollar General and I get some items and stuff like that, and then I go back to the hotel and I just kind of ride it out for the rest of the day. So Tuesday morning comes by, and I pack my stuff, and I get ready to hop on their little WRTA type system, and we finally make our way to this Greyhound station, which was just like a curb. It was like a little office where you got your ticket, and then you just waited on the curb, and that's where the Greyhound picked you up. And so they ended up picking me up at like, it was like 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night. And the trip was like, I didn't get into Youngstown until like 2 o'clock the next day, because we stopped here and stopped there, and when we went west, and then we went back south again, and I had layovers in Columbus and Cleveland and all this stuff. And so I finally, I make my way to Youngstown. And throughout all this time, I knew about the rescue mission, but I knew nothing about it. I knew it was a homeless shelter, and I knew that that's where I was gonna go, because I had nowhere else to go. And I would just figure it out from there. And so I get into Youngstown, and I remember I had a book bag, and I had a little luggage, like a little suitcase that I was wheeling behind me. And then I remember going to the jail, and I remember calling my mom and saying, you know, hey, I'm in town now. I'm in town now. And she said, okay. And she's like, well, make sure you go to the mission. So I said, okay. And as I leave the jail after I got off the phone with her, I remember I got about halfway up the street, and I stopped and I sat down on the side of the road over there. And I thought to myself, I'm like, this is stupid. Like, I started to get like that I'm Brad Weber type feeling. I don't need to go to a homeless shelter. I'm better than that. Let me think who I could call. And it was at that very moment where I finally, we call it rock bottom. That was my rock bottom. I was halfway up the road and realized that I couldn't call any of my family, couldn't call any of my friends. I had no friends, didn't even have a way to get a hold of them if I wanted to. And I thought, this is what life has become. You know, I'm a high school graduate. I was a 4-year letterman. I went to college. I had a great family, all kinds of worldly success. And here I am sitting on the side of a road, homeless and nowhere to go. And so it was at that moment I was like, I need to go to the rescue mission. And so I continued walking, and I came in the front door. And it was immediately as I walked in the front door, I felt like Christ had called me to where he wanted me to be. I had felt the love of God for the first time in my life. And so I remember sitting in the lobby, and I spoke with Miss Karen, who's our receptionist, and I told her my story and said, you know, I needed a place to stay. And about a half an hour later, they came and grabbed me and brought me back to an intake. And a guy by the name of Doug came in, and I told him my story, and he picked me up right away and brought me into this room. Actually, they were having Bible study on a Wednesday afternoon, and he introduced me to the guys, and I sat in on a Bible study. And a couple hours went by, and they had they were doing a singing performance at another church in town, and so I went with the guys then, got to meet them. And even in that night, I was still thinking, like, that's not for me. Like, this, you know, religion, Christianity, that's not for me. I just need to get clean, I'll be good, start work and save money, and I'll get out of here. And so I remember calling my mom that night and telling her what they had here about the academy program. And I remember her saying, she's like, what do you think is going to be different this time? And I was like, wow. So my mom and I have been through so much together. And here she now is saying, what do you think is going to be different? Why do you think you're going to work this time? Because I've been in 3 rehabs, a total of 2 weeks. Nothing ever worked. And I told her, I was like, I just feel different about this place. I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. So the next morning, it would have been Thursday, I enrolled in the academy, and I committed my life to follow Christ. And I remember one of the guys, because I was still new to Christianity at this time, so I really wasn't familiar with anything about it. And I remember asking one of the guys, I was like, I don't want to just get clean. Like, I want to have a whole new life. Like, I want to be transformed from who I used to be. And he said, 2 Corinthians 5:17 is, if you are in Christ, you are a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, all things are being made new. And when I heard that for the first time, I thought, that's what I want. Like, I don't want to just not do drugs. Like, I want to have a completely transformed life. And it was on that Thursday afternoon that it was sort of the beginning of where I'm sitting today. I went through the academy, and shortly after I was in the academy, it was about a month and a half. Relationships with families started to come back around. My mom and dad started to come up here and visit. My grandma would come up and visit. And then on December 31st, 2013, I had went to a bowling party of a church of a pastor who was preaching here or teaching here. They had a bowling party in Austintown, and I met a girl by the name of Christine. And you know, it's funny, like, sparks didn't fly when we first met her. We just kind of talked. And then I remember about a month or so later, I took the bus out to the mall. She was working at the mall. And you know, we just kind of started talking. Like, I didn't have a phone at this point. She knew that I was homeless. She knew that I was an addict and all of these things. And so I thought, how am I going to approach this situation? How am I going to do that? And so I remember we went to, she would come and pick me up. And as we were kind of like talking. Like we weren't even like dating or anything. We were just sort of talking. And I was like starting to get like feelings in my head like, I got so much to worry about right now. I can't have a lady coming into my life, you know? And so she came and picked me up one day, and I have no shame in admitting this. I love Taylor Swift. And so she was playing Taylor Swift when she picked me up, and she had a pack of Reese's peanut butter cups, which are my favorite thing. And we went and got sushi, and after we were done, I said, I'm in trouble. So we went and sat at Perkins one day, we had lunch, and I sort of just poured my heart out to her and told her my whole story, and she didn't care. She was just like, I don't know that person, and the person I know is you. So I explained my desire to go into ministry and be a pastor and all of these things, and she was fine with it. And so I think it was March 20th that we started dating, and fast forward to October of 2016, we ended up getting married. So we're coming up on almost 2 years of marriage now. So that has been a big thing. I went from having multiple relationships and never even being committed to a woman to being fully in love with one and spending the rest of my life with one, which was a big transformation. And so we started dating, and then in June of 2014, I ended up graduating from the academy here. Shortly after, a couple days after, I got hired on as a client advisor. End of April, they had pulled me in. We have these things called one-on-ones where a guy comes in and we talk about how they're doing and if they need to work on stuff. And it was at about the end of April that they had offered me a job. And they said that, we want you to come on as a client advisor, and would you be interested in doing that? And I said, absolutely. So when I graduated on June 13th, about a week later, I started working here, and it was in the men's office, client advisor, first point of contact with people that I was. I'm now 8 months in, and I'm able to share my story and talk to people about Christ and explain to them, like, listen, like, you don't have to be a drug addict. You're not a drug addict any longer. Those are old labels. They're not what defines you.